Hey folks, Steve here with a very special video for you today. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my most anticipated game for 2024, assuming that the game does come out in 2024. I think that's at least the current expectation. And that game is Lightning Strikes, what you can see on screen here. This is a game that will be coming from Compass Games. It's designed by Dave Lelacheur. I may be mispronouncing that. If so, I apologize if Dave ever watches this video. And this is a game that has some connection to World in Flames, which, because of that, that obviously piques my interest from right out of the gate. But there's a lot that is going to be in this game that makes it really interesting. Now, I don't have any special relationship with Compass Games, but Dave and I have emailed before, mostly just questions about other games and just some initial look at what was going to be playtest materials that ultimately I could not engage in. So I do have a little bit of information that is not public around this game that makes me excited. But for the purposes of this video, because I really can't talk about things that are not, public knowledge already, I'm just going to be talking about the game in relation to what you can look up right now on the Compass Games website and the page for the game on Board Game Geek. Now, Dave has created one other game in a vein that's not too dissimilar from this called Whi Blitz. And I haven't really talked about that game on this channel very much, though I do have Whi Blitz, and I have played around with it over the years, off and on, trying out different things with it. And it's a cool game. I think Whi Blitz is an interesting game that allows you to play World War II in not nearly the same amount of time it takes to play World in Flames, but it is a very different game. And I think in the design effort for Whi Blitz to be a simpler, more stripped down game, it kind of ends up being its own monster in a way. Meanwhile, now with this Lightning Strikes, which certainly has some design DNA from Whi Blitz, Lightning Strikes actually, from what I can tell, does strike a closer chord to World in Flames in general in terms of the way the game works and the mechanics, though still a bit streamlined and ultimately a very different scope. So just, you can give this a read here. It gives the players a chance to write a completely new narrative of the 20th century world history. The full campaign takes players from the outbreak of World War I, 1914, through 1954, and covering, what could end up being a World War III, or really, because you're playing this from the outbreak of World War I mean, you could have several world wars, just based on the diplomatic situation that you and your fellow players are going to derive. And so this is more of an epoch game, an era game, than just a game about World War I, or just a game about World War II, though there are scenarios that will be available that allow you to cover just those historical topics if you want to. So if I scroll through here, there's some pictures we can look at. We can look at the map. I'm not sure. We have a pretty good fidelity map here. The map is set up as areas, not hexes, which is what you'd be used to in World in Flames, but it does have a lot of the same sort of map design language in terms of resource spots on the map. So you can see this sort of, kind of hard to see at this zoom level, but these orange circles are, they have like a pick and a shovel inside of them. That's a basic resource. Those are used alongside factories, which you can just barely see here, to create the production points you use to build units and do this, that, and the other. Now, you're going to see some weirdness here because you've got this like forest terrain that is used in Spain and Italy, and maybe in areas you wouldn't consider foresty terrain. That's because that map art, the forest look, that does come from World in Flames. But if you can read this terrain key, it is indicating rough. So basically, all the map art is using the same basic underlying art for World in Flames. World in Flames does not have rough terrain. It's either clear or woods or any number of things. But this game, because it's so zoomed out, right, even more so than a World in Flames game, you need some intermediary between true mountain hexes or mountain regions and clear. And so Dave has elected to use the terminology of rough, which is in plenty of war games, but it does use this forest art, which can look a little weird if you go, hey, those aren't forest hexes in other games, and maybe we wouldn't consider them forest hexes in real life. Well, they're not forest; they're rough. So that's going to be a little weird for people. I don't mind it; it's fine, but it is something that is going to look odd at first glance. You do have sea areas, and you do have a box for convoys and escorts. So what this is doing is shrinking even the World in Flames naval system, which I quite like, and I like the abstraction of it and what it means, to either you're patrolling, you're in the sea zone, or you're very specifically part of a convoy setup or an escort for a convoy, and it's one or the other. And there's a different methodology to handle searching, I believe, because you don't have search boxes in here like you would in a World in Flames game. But the same basic ideas are all there as a way to handle the game. Now, this is actually going to be a much better map to look at. The game's going to apparently include a separate, more zoomed in for scale map of Europe, so that depending on how you want to put units on the map, you can, if you're going to have a lot of activity in Europe, which is going to be the case for World War I and World War II, you can set this up alongside the map. Maybe you put the ground units on here, and you put the air and naval units on the other map, or vice versa, whatever floats your boat. But you can see the map default is the World War I borders. So Austria-Hungary here, Germany. But you'll continue to see some iconography for, like, the radioactive symbol that is research, I think, is going to be how that works. So there's a lot of different elements in the game that is, this is very clearly a grand strategy game or a strategic level game, but again, you're not only dealing with just a war, but you're also dealing with the aftermath of World War I, the transition of World War II, World War II and beyond. So there's a lot more to that. And if you want to look at these units here, and we'll blow this up for a second, the units are going to look the most like Whi Blitz, where each unit is basically army level. So we're not even talking corps. We're talking armies, and each individual unit could have multiple steps. You can also see here the HQ units with named leaders, and if this works like Whi Blitz, and I'm pretty sure it will, green boxes are ground land factors. So when you look at like a plane, which may include, these are pretty big units in terms of like what does this represent. So there's fighters, there's bombers, there may be a leaning in one particular direction for a given unit here, like some of these, but you can see green box ground factors. The white factors are air, so like air-to-air combat that uses those factors, and then naval in sort of like the blue box. It's a little, I would say to some degree, even more coherent than the Whi default, because World in Flames, you just kind of have these numbers up in the corners of the counter, and you're stuck, having to, until you really learn it well, having to remember, top left, top right number, bottom left number, bottom right number. Here, there's a color component that helps it a bit to understand. This dark green is jet capability, and you can start to see there's some more advanced equipment here being displayed. So the little Roman numerals, I believe, have to do with like a tech level or era level, and so some of these things are going to be like post World War II, but you can see where they're now jet air units, and the red corners here, which are, it's a little hard to see, there's a little minus sign in them. When in combat, those red triangles basically affect your opponent's combat factors as a penalty. And so I would say, because of the way this game is set up, that this is broadly a firepower-based combat system where you want to increase your combat factors as high as possible. The ratio doesn't matter, like in a game for maneuver or a game of maneuver, where maneuver combat's more important than strictly firepower, because we're so zoomed out. The game uses more of a firepower-based system, so you really want to get as many factors as you can. You try to offset the red triangles or the white triangles, which actually increase your opponent's combat factors, and then you roll dice, I believe, to determine the results there. And so you can start to see, if you look at like early era, the numbers tend to be lower, and then as you advance in era, things get better and better. So land units have eras or time frames. I'm not sure what the right terminology is here. Tech levels. But different capabilities through a force pool. So this is like the German force pool. I'm not sure if they have more than one counter or not, but you can see a pretty wide variety of units here. And that includes things like armor units, as well as territorial type units, if you're familiar with World in Flames. So there's a nice variety of different types of units, air, naval. You can see some of the naval stuff here. A-bomb, it is, I guess, possible for the Germans to build an A-bomb, but I think that would be unlikely in a game. Oh, no, more Germans on this counter sheet. So there are plenty of counter sheet images you can look at here. I suspect that's these are like buildable things. This is from World in Flames. Like, you can increase oil production with the synthetic plant, so you can build that in Berlin. You can build that, or you can expand oil capability in Dallas, London, Omsk. And I suspect this radioactive thing has to deal with the nuclear A-bomb stuff. But a wide variety of counters here. You're also going to see things here like discontent markers, government type. So it sounds like over the course of the game, right, you have Imperial Germany is one particular government type, and Nazi Germany is a different one. Same thing with, you can see there's a war counter here showing the flag of Imperial Russia or civilian Russia versus Soviet Russia. And so I suspect that's a differentiation in government type, right? So you're not just talking about this faction, this major power in a war game. It's the variations of these powers over time in the game. And I guess if I just pop back to the German thing here, you can see Ludendorff, right? He's from World War I era, but then you eventually get to folks like Rommel, Guderian. You can see Falkenhayn, Hindenburg. So you'll run a gamut of different capabilities here. Same thing with the khaki British. So you can see there's Monty. French in World War I. And all of that. So I don't need to pour over each and every one of these, but you can see kind of the way that the counters are coming up. I do like them. I think they're very attractive in terms of the way they've got this nice sort of banner color at the top. This actually is really important, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a picture that I'm going to be able to use or talk about maybe when we look at the BGG page. But if there is another version of that power, let's say the Russians from World War I, Imperial Russia, I believe you still have this sort of like brown, tan, burnt orange, brown color for Russia, but the Imperial Russian units have a totally separate force pool than Soviet Russia, and I believe the banners may be a different color for that sort of thing. So there's a lot. In fact, when we look at what's going to be included in this package, We're going to see there's a lot of counters in this game. This looks like a impulse tracker or turn tracker, so you can see goes in 6-month turns, basically, or something thereabouts. Summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. So you can start in 1914, you can go all the way to 1954. 6 months worth of activities. But like World in Flames, it uses an impulse, so you're going to get to go, your side will get to go a number of times in that 6-month time period. So you have a pretty, decent amount of decisions to make even within a year span. You figure, okay, if we're talking World War One, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 turns. But you're still going to have gone several times in that, so you're really talking about like 30, maybe 30 different activations or moves in World War One before you get to the interwar period. You can see, and this gets into, so there's weather, but here's new weapons development track. This is how you get access to those later era units. Okay, so it's called eras, era 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I just look at this for a second, you can see there's, as the primary powers, there's Germany, Japan, USA, Commonwealth, and then USSR Russia, Imperial Russia, distinctly called out. And then you look at some of these other sort of minor powers. You have Austria-Hungary, may not survive, France, Italy, Ottoman Empire, India as a distinct entity, and I suspect there may be some ways for India to break away from the Commonwealth, Poland, Ukraine, Spain, depending on your flavor of Spain. And then you have nationalist China. You have Peking China, which it's really interesting to see that, because I think what they're referencing here, or what's titled as Peking China, is sort of this like pseudo-imperial China that had come up out of the first Chinese Revolution, where they were setting up a republic, and I think the general's name was Yuan. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce that right, but Yuan kind of establishes his own sort of like dictatorship, sets himself up as like an emperor, but it's not, again, it's still like this sort of mutation of the first Chinese Republic that was trying to be set up. So I like, this is some really interesting stuff to be displayed in the game, as opposed to even Fatal Alliances, which is the World War One World in Flames game, where China kind of just like, you don't really see under the hood of China until China gets activated to enter the war as an active power, and at which case, like, I believe they just consider it nationalist China at that point. You never really get to see this sort of pseudo Imperial China in 1914. So it looks like there's some different ways to see how China develops, even a unified China. I'm not sure what that will all mean. And then you see there's a list here for warlords, where the Chinese warlords, Russian warlords, representing some of the fallout of the civil wars, I believe is what that's going to end up representing, something like that. So that's kind of an interesting thing to see. And then I'm going to direct your attention to this picture, which this is a power, like a major power card. I believe each one's going to get one. So you see like Japan. And it's how you can track your production assets. So an easy way to track, how many resources do I have? How many factories do I have? Your current force pool versus what will end up joining the force pool as you get to later eras. The production multiplier. So it looks like you can see there's a distinction between government types. So here's where you see that progressive, representative, authoritarian, totalitarian, with different production multipliers that apply. And I suspect there's a lot of different elements to this, that if you're a progressive power, whatever that may mean, you're going to have certain benefits or penalties. Representative government, which must be, a more constrained form of representation, is maybe a little bit different, a little bit worse. Authoritarian, or better maybe in some ways, who knows? Authoritarian, totalitarian. And could you end up with a representative government Japan? Maybe. I'm not sure how all that will work, but it's interesting to see it. And then you're also tracking discontent. And if I zoom in here, it looks like, it's kind of hard because these tracks are being dual purposed. If you get over into, I guess, down over here, you say like government crisis. Well, does your government, if your discontent level hits high enough, your government goes into crisis. And so that's probably a version of like the morale mechanics from Fatal Alliances, which I quite enjoy. So you're seeing not just the war game elements of this, but because it's crossing the world wars, you're definitely seeing the political element come in here, and how things come together with your allies. There's this credit rating. I'm not sure what all that will use, but drafts use. I assume that means like military drafting civilians in a war. Um, so a lot of different elements that you need to manage, not just the raw materials, but the political angle, the diplomatic angle, which I think is very cool. And again, it's aimed to provide a robust experience for World War I, World War II, and beyond. It's something that still feels, a little, it's not the footprint of World in Flames. It also gives more of its time and effort to these other elements that tend to be a little more constrained in a World in Flames perspective. Now, if I'm gonna, no rules yet, but the description here, you go through 5 major powers: Commonwealth, Germany, Japan, Russia, or the USA. There are secondary powers: Austria-Hungary, China, 3 factions: Communist, Nationalist, and an Imperial faction. Okay, that's what I was kind of talking with Peking. France, Italy, Ottoman Empire, dozens of other minor countries, including many new ones that can be created along the way. You can refight these various civil wars. Lots of what if possibilities. See if the Central Powers can win, or at least not lose, World War I, and whether some of these empires can survive. You can create situations where these other minor powers can gain independence. And you're basically playing through 40 years. There's a standard game and a basic game, so you can dial in the complexity of what you want. Some of the scenarios are going to be shorter. We'll look at some of the information that's been provided by Dave as it relates to that, and we're talking about 50 hours plus for the full campaign. When I think about World in Flames, a full campaign, you're definitely talking 100 hours or more, much more than 100 hours probably. So if it's somewhere above 50, you can get multiple World Wars. Yeah, sure, maybe not at the same fidelity level as World in Flames, but you're also looking at half the time. So, you do the math on that, and that's a lot of game to enjoy. I'm really interested by this, that solitaire bots are included. And with that certainty on the page, it's like this isn't one of those solitaire bot is going to come later after the game's made. Like, it sounds like they've got them ready to go. So if you're a solitaire gamer, or you're somebody who ends up having to play solitaire games, or play games solitaire just because it's hard to get people together, that's my situation. That's why a lot of my stuff's solitaire. It's hard to get together with people. I live a little further away than a lot of my gaming friends. Having a solitaire bot as an option, that's very attractive. Players 2 to 5 at a baseline, and let's see what we're going to get. We're going to get 2 mounted maps. Okay, mounted is very interesting. So we're going to need a big box, I suspect. We're going to get that additional zoomed-in mounted map and that's mounted 2, which is really interesting, of Europe. 17 counter sheets. My goodness. 5/8 inch counters. 3,000 counters. This is another big game. This is going to be a big game. No matter which way you cut it, it's going to be big. There's cards, political cards, and I think I'm not sure what shape these are going to take. Maybe the Board Game Geek page will help us. There's going to be those track displays, several displays, combat charts, lots of charts. Apparently, there's going to be tons of player aid charts. Solitaire play chart, very detailed sequence of play chart. So lots of stuff is coming. 4 10-sided dice, rulebook, scenario book with play examples, box and lid set, of course. Sounding pretty good. If we go over to the Board Game Geek page, I believe all the pictures are the same pictures we've seen published elsewhere. I don't think there's anything new there. But if you do, you can see I've been on the forums, guys. Look at those purple links. There's a lot in here. Let me see if I can find the right thread. I might have to bounce over to the Blitz. There is a preliminary review from a tester, okay, maybe a bit biased, but if you read through here, Alberto Natta provides a lot of interesting information on how the game can go. I mean, I'm just like, in one of my test games starting in 14, the Germans marched into Paris in 3 turns, and my opposing tester simply applied a reasoning that with France capitulating, Commonwealth invasion capabilities being at Gallipoli level, so not very good, and the whole might of German and Austro-Hungarian armies to hammer Tsarist Russia led to a rapid armistice. And that's really interesting, the fact that you can, like, you do have that bandwidth to say, hey, let's end the war early, or let's end the war a certain way, because really you're playing the long game for 40 years, right? So maybe you try to get out of World War I quickly. Maybe you do try to get home by Christmas. What will be the terms of peace for the Triple Entente that emerged defeated from World War I? Which are the gains of the Central Powers? And I believe you actually go through that, and you make those decisions depending on how badly the other side lost the war. How do you arrange this? Which I think would be very, very interesting. Players can experience 3 or 4 world wars in that time frame. So you just go through maybe iterative wars depending on the way the alliances are set up at that given moment. There's a whole thing here, so I would advise you read this. This is a source of a lot of my understanding of the way the game is supposed to work, at least that I can talk about publicly. So if you're really curious, I think this is I've read through this before, I probably should reread it. There's just a lot, I think, that's going to be in this game that's going to make it be something. You can see I'm talking about it. I get the feeling like this is going to be an absolute triumph of a game. The scenarios that I've heard about include some very obvious basic ones, learning scenarios. I have seen, there's a thread in here somewhere, and I don't want this video to be too long, but somewhere in here, I go looking for it, Dave does publish a sort of short list of scenarios. There is a very specific Russian Civil War scenario. You have your World War I. If you just want to play World War I, you can just do that. You can just play World War II, and it gives you the setup for that, I believe. You can play the Grand Campaign, where it's really, open, going from World War I through World War II. There are alternate history scenarios, of which I don't have a full comprehension of what all that can entail, but I have heard that there's some of those. Here's a one where it's derived from America in Flames, where America is besieged by Axis that controls the Pacific and Europe, and so you're kind of hitting your man in the high castle kind of situation there. And I believe there's also basically the jumping right into hypothetical World War III, basically being the analog to the Patton in Flames expansion for World in Flames. And those are going to be scenarios in this game from the outset. So it's like, no matter, I guess as somebody who really likes World in Flames, I like Fatal Alliances, I like World in Flames. America in Flames and Patton in Flames are kind of interesting, side things to look at. But it looks like Lightning Strikes is going to encompass, whatever it's doing for World War I and World War II, it's doing for these other things as well. So you have so many options to play, I think, out of this box. Based on what I've read, what I've heard, you can do so many different types of scenarios. You can play World War I and maybe end up in a very different place for World War II. Or if you just want to play World War II in this sort of abbreviated format and not a full World in Flames deal, you can do that. Finally, other thing worth mentioning is it sounds like there's a way to off-ramp from Lightning Strikes in a World in Flames to some degree where you can play Lightning Strikes maybe up to a point and then switch over and follow some guidance to start playing World in Flames using the map setup. The full understanding of how that works, I think, is still to come. But the other element of this I've heard is you could potentially leverage the political and diplomatic rules, the government type rules, and discontent in your World in Flames game as well. So you can kind of use this as a wrapper around World in Flames to handle certain things differently. If you like that, if that's an option you want to pursue, it sounds like that's feasible. I definitely see like there's not a huge like they're not calling out World in Flames as much as I think they probably ought to be, because I think while it's saying it's based on the World in Flames family, I do see this as a very like I almost see this as an unofficial expansion of World in Flames to some degree. I think it has a connective tissue to both Fatal Alliances and World in Flames, and it becomes it's a standalone game clearly designed to be, but you can make it as an added element to your existing Fatal Alliances in World in Flames experience, and I think that's just awesome. I mean, that's great. That's like music to my ears in terms of what I'm used to playing from a World in Flames perspective. And in some ways, and maybe this is too bold to say, I wonder if Lightning Strikes could be the replacement for Days of Decision, because Days of Decision, as we have it today, which is Days of Decision 3, which provides you the ability to do like pre-World War II stuff. You start earlier in like 1936, and you can make some different decisions, and World War II can start off a bit differently. Days of Decision was not properly updated for the current version of World in Flames, which means that, while you can try, and people have certainly done it, it's got its own little fiddly things you need to address. I think Lightning Strikes could maybe be an alternative to Days of Decision and still give you some similar things. So you could play out some parts of the eras leading up to World War II, and then use that off-ramp into World in Flames and end up with a different World War II. In a similar vein to what you would do with Days of Decision, where you could play Days of Decision as its own game, you could play it as the political diplomatic wrapper around World in Flames. It sounds like Lightning Strikes can do the same thing. So it's crazy to think about, right? It's its own game with 3,000 counters. It serves up, its version of Fatal Alliances, World in Flames, American Flames, Patent Flames, and it provides an analog or even a replacement for Days of Decision with some similar capabilities, maybe a bit different. I mean, I'm not sure how all this is going to play out once we have the product in hand, but man, when I look at that, I go, I can't wait for this. Like, I can't wait for this game to come out. I want to play it. I want to be experimenting with it. I want to try out the different ways that World War I can end, and what does that mean for the rest of the grand campaign. Because I think that there's always this extra pool, even if you like a World War II game, of mixing it up. And we've seen that with Axis Empires Ultimate Edition with the Dice of Decision module, where you can kind of come up with a different way for World War II to start, and that's like its own little mini game. Here, Lightning Strikes is offering that to you as just part of the game. Play World War I, fight World War I, see what comes out the other end of that, and that can directly affect your World War II. You can have an Austria-Hungary in World War II. There's a lot here to enable you to play that game, so it's effectively giving you the full stack, right? Your World War I, the outcomes of that, feeding into World War II, gives you World War II. It gives you beyond that, and I don't know. You guys can tell from listening to this, I am super stoked for this. I cannot wait. Now, this is available you can pre-order it on the Compass Games website right now. I guess the eventual MSRP, price for this is going to be $170, which is pretty pricey. Given you're getting multiple mounted maps, 17 counter sheets, tons of player aids. It's going to be probably very similar to the Third World War and other games of this size where you're getting a lot. But if you pre-order it, it's 130, which is a nice discount there off the eventual price. And from what I've heard, it's like sometime this year it's going to come out. I guess all the components must be done. Dave has submitted, all the component stuff to Compass, and it's just on Compass to get the pre-orders or whatever they're doing there and publish the game sometime later this year, I hope. So if this interests you, I encourage you to pre-order it. I have, again, no special relationship to Compass Games. I have conversed with Dave as part of the WIF community, and I've seen some of this stuff prior to the publication of some of these screenshots as things have kind of come together on the game, but I just can't wait to play it. Like, I just can't wait to get this going in my hands. I'd love to play it with the solitaire bots. I want to play it with my WIF group. My WIF group is very interested in this. We're all kind of looking forward to seeing this come out and giving it a shot, seeing how it can relate to the rest of our WIF games that we're playing. This is just, to me, the biggest game to look forward to this year. I can't wait, guys. So there you go. That's a 36-minute, 37-minute video on a game that has not come out yet, but it is constantly on my mind. I really can't wait for this one, folks. If it interests you, I encourage you to pre-order or keep an eye out and see how this develops. I'm going to keep an eye out on the Board Game Geek page. Dave is posting there. We will see as we get closer to release what else may come. I'd really like to see some more play session reports. I think this is a nice little snippet here, but what I'd really love to see is maybe some sort of like play session with more screenshots so people can see how this comes. There's some question and answers here that's worth reviewing. We don't have time to dig into everything here, but I think there's enough. If you're really interested in the game, you can do some research and learn more. I think we're just scratching the surface with what information is available on these two pages. So, all right, I got to wrap this video up. I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to keep thinking about Lightning Strikes for the next, I guess, however many months it takes for this game to reach my shelf and my table. Hope this video was somewhat enjoyable to you. A look into my mind of what is my most anticipated game for this year. I hope it gave you a reason to look a little bit deeper at this one and piques your interest. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Until the next video, guys, take care. Keep gaming.